to see you here. Tracey Hecht is here today in her capacity as the creative director of Fabled Films Press, where she's developing a series of shows that reimagine classic works from the Victorian canon in the emergent voices of members of various marginalized groups. She's going to tell you more about that in a minute or two, but I wanted to tell you more about Tracey as a writer herself. The American Booksellers Association chose her book, The Mysterious Abductions, the first in her critically acclaimed middle grade series, The Nocturnals, as a kids' indie next list pick. Tracy expanded the series to include 3 more middle grade books and 8 early reader books so that families with young children can enjoy the reading experience together. Tracy is sought after as a speaker. She's visited schools throughout North America, led webinars for the American Association of School Librarians on the benefits of reading aloud, and was on a panel at the 2019 Convention on Rollicking Read-Alouds for the Read Aloud writing program she developed in partnership with the New York Public Library. She's also appeared as a panelist for the American Booksellers Association's ABC Children's Institute, where she focused on how to run successful virtual author visits. Tracy has expanded her work on the Nocturnals to television, where she's in development with Red Knot, a Canadian production unit of Nelvana and Discovery Latam for a television series based on the books. She spends much of her time in New York City, but her home base is right here in Montreal, although she's in Maine today. We at QWF are very excited that she approached us, and I'm delighted to give you all this opportunity to hear from her directly. So please join me in welcoming Tracey Hecht.
Thank you. So I'm really happy to be here today. I've gotten to know and worked with Lori and the team for probably now 2 or 3 months, and subsequently met several of the writers as part of the membership. And I'm really, it's for me, it's exciting because I have a fairly good network of writers and writer communities in New York, but I haven't had that opportunity to expand it in Montreal because I ironically moved to Montreal March 14th of 2020. So literally like 2 days before we all went into quarantine, where I have lived for the remainder of COVID in my house. So I really haven't gotten to know Montreal or any of the people in Montreal. So I thought what I would do today is talk a little bit about what Fabled Films does, and why we're doing this classics program. And maybe what I'll do is start a little bit with the philosophy of Fabled Films, because I think it's really important, especially as writers who, one of the hardest things to do as a writer is to have your voice be heard once you're published. It's a really competitive market, and that was something we had in mind when we started Fabled Films Press, my partner and I, Stacey Ashton, who's the publisher of Fabled Films. We started the press because we had seen a migration of kids who essentially would have a great ability for discovery in books. And what happened was the publishing industry has, I'm just going to do one thing because I'm having a little bit of a speaker view problem. There we go. That works better. Sorry, I was distracted by the Zoom. But we started the press because what we found were that readers and also our partners, librarians, independent booksellers, schools, they were having a really hard time managing the number of books that they were being sold month over month, which is a wonderful thing because the books were being expanded, but a really tricky thing if you're a writer, because your book goes out, maybe your press gives you a few weeks of support, and then the next thing you know, there's 10 more books that they're essentially marketing and supporting in the same way. And so it's really hard to get your book noticed. And we decided what we wanted to do was focus on a smaller number of titles and a larger collection within those titles, and really, really support them with strong educational programs. So the Nocturnals focuses really, really primarily on read aloud and the value of read aloud, because for children who are middle grade, it's great for them to have aspirational reading. So you can read to a second grader the Nocturnals books, even though it's more at a 4th or a 5th grade level. And to give a lot of programming around it. We do a lot of social emotional programming around the Nocturnals. The idea is also with all of our properties is to create all the IP in books so that we have really rich worlds, strong characters, but then put them in other places, because kids today really don't have any delineation on where they access their favorite storytelling. And for them, YouTube or a comic book or a piece of fiction or even, you know, a network television show, it's all very seamless to them. And so we wanted to have our stories drive readers back to the books and put them in places that would encourage them to do so. So if you meet a character in a TV show, you can find them in a book. And if they're established in a book, you have a much richer ability to develop those characters before they get extended. So the Nocturnals we're putting into television right now with our partner in Canada. And we're really excited. It's a totally different medium, of which I have a little bit of experience, but very little in actual animation, children's television. But I have worked on movies and written movies before, so I have some sense of storytelling with a visual element. And then the second property we're doing, which is a collection of reimagined works, is really in response to two issues we noticed, which is that, you know, from a publisher's perspective, it really is our responsibility to expand who the voices that our readers today are exposed to. And I think a lot of publishers are focusing on that right now. But the more we can do it, the better, because the more kids get to read books about kids who are like and not like them, the better. And because our demographics are becoming, you know, much more expanded in a way that is properly being acknowledged, finally, we think that our books should do the same. So we wanted to expand the Victorian canon primarily because all of the studies we've done about reading is that when a child is exposed to content prior to reading it, they retain it better. So if you have two third graders and one's a great reader and one's not a great reader, but one knows a ton about basketball, if you give the not great reader a book about basketball and the very good reader a book about basketball, the child who's not a strong reader but knows a lot about basketball will retain it better and have better outcomes in terms of his comprehension or her comprehension. And so what we wanted to do was take books that are on the syllabuses in North America and translate them into sort of what I would call more digestible storytelling in a reimagined sense, so that once these middle graders get to high school and face these, you know, much more complicated works, which are fabulous, they should have a better ability to understand what the storytelling is. Because, for instance, in the first book, we met Pippa, who is Pip from Great Expectations, and they get a sense of what the storytelling is. So when they actually are faced with the longer and more sophisticated text, they understand the story component. In finding these emergent voices, it's incumbent upon us as a publisher to find representation from all groups. And so one of the things for us is that we're really looking into, you know, anyone who defines themselves as an emergent voice is really interesting for us. It can be someone who's neurodiverse. It can be somebody who has a different body positive approach to how they see themselves physically. It could be someone who's a person of color. But it's really wonderful to have the protagonists in our stories reflect what is a much more properly acknowledged demographic of kids living today. So, so what I thought I would do is just sort of talk to you a little bit about this this collection of works, and we're taking submissions on this collection right now. We want to write probably I would say between 4 and 6 books in this collection. We have one published right now, and the idea is that because we're doing it as a collection, we have a little more ability to support you as a writer. So if I have a brand new writer, one of the things that's really hard is to get people to pay attention to you. I had the same issue. I had never written for middle grade. And when we launched the Nocturnals, it was really difficult to get people to pay attention to a new writer. But because we're launching these books in a collection of works, we're hoping to get a little more attention and a little more support. And at this point, we have over 10,000 libraries that are part of our team. We have great relationships with these libraries, and libraries are library systems. So you know, the Montreal library system, we have several outlets there. So it's not just 10,000 outlets, it's 10,000 partners with several outlets. And, you know, that's a really great thing for our writers, because the hardest thing about writing a book is that you write it and it's so exciting. And then you put it out there and it seems to somehow just sort of disappear into the ether, and 100 new books come right after you. So I know many of you are published writers. I know some of you are aspiring published writers. And I thought what we could do today is talk really about any part of this. We could talk about the collection that we're taking submissions for. We could talk about my experience in publishing and as a writer. One of the things I love the most when I get on programs like this is that we're all exactly the same, doing exactly the same thing. So we have a lot to learn from each other. And this should be a really nice active dialogue of anything you sort of want the conversation to explore. And I don't know, Lori, how we want to do that. If we want to have people just unmute themselves and ask questions, I think we have a small enough group that would work. But I can sort of follow all of your leads.
Okay, are you ready to do that now?
I am, mostly because I think because we have a small group of people here, it really makes sense for me to talk to what they're most interested in instead of me just go on and on and on about what maybe I think they might be interested in.
Sure. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpin you and then suggest that people go to gallery view on their own screens. And if you don't know where that is, it's usually at the top right if you're on a laptop. And then we can all see each other. And you are welcome to, depending on what speed the questions come in, we can start by saying, if you have a question, raise your hand and then unmute yourself. And I don't think we should keep ourselves unmuted all the time because noises do find a way of coming in. But raise your hand, unmute yourself. If two people do it at once, I will say a name and you'll go in that order. So are there specific questions that you want to start out by asking Tracy?
How many of you have actually published works? Okay, so
and those of you who, I'm just going to say, those of you who don't have your cameras on, if you're willing, it would make it easier since we're asking you to raise your hands. You can use the reaction button, but if you're not in your pajamas and you can join us, that's nice. Or if you're in your pajamas and you can join us. So Tracy, you want to ask your question again?
I got a sense that we do have a lot of published writers here. So I think a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you've lived this. I did see that Susan, you had your hand up if you wanted to ask something. We can just start there.
Right. Well, this is such an exciting possibility here. I'm wondering what would the application process include? What would we need to do? Could we send you a story? I haven't written a book,
So most of the writers we work with are not published writers. So we really believe that it's also part of our role as in publishing to help expand the knowledge and experience. And we have incredible editors on our team. So we don't ask people to send us their published works. We ask people to send us a few things about you personally, so we know what your background is, what your training is, what your sort of interests are as a writer, and then a few writing samples. You can send one, you can send more than one. But the idea is to sort of hear your voice and how you inhabit a narrator voice, and the best way that you think communicates. But we really have worked, our first published author, Erin Yun, she had never written anything. She was a recent graduate from college, and we invest a lot in our writers. We have a really incredible team of editors. In particular, my editorial partner is a woman named Susan Lurie, who she has edited every single R.L. Stine book ever published. So the Goosebumps, Freak Street, all of those books, over 200 books. And she's really a terrific editor, and I learn a lot from her every time. So in terms of the submission, my creative partner and creative assistant, Maria, will give you what they are, but it's basically the basic things: a CV, if you have any social media handles, a writing sample, and a letter about why reimagining a classic would be a compelling and interesting project for you. And our idea is that we tend to work in stages. So if we engage with a writer, we tend to have 3 or 4 moments where we don't just send you off on your own. We work with you on your outline. First, we talk to you about doing a treatment about which book you'd want. and why you'd want it, and how you would imagine you'd scaffold your story around the original text. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to see the first book published in the collection, but we're not literal about the story. It does not have to be a chapter by chapter or even a theme by theme. The idea is to expose readers to the concepts and overall story arcs. So we have a lot of flexibility. We're working with a Latinx writer right now on Frankenstein, and it's a really fun project with her, because she's really thinking about what it means to have control and manipulation over somebody else, and what that power means, and how undermining it is, and how sort of what I would call skewing it is, but also exhilarating. So we really open up what it is to reimagine, based on what the writer wants. So the submission materials are very, very basic, but you are engaged, based on your interest and ability to express why a certain text or project would be fun for you.
So how well, you say we're going to get the actual details a bit later. Is that what you said?
Well, what I can do is I can give everybody the email where you can get in touch with us. I didn't assume everybody would want to participate, so but it's really easy. It's my name, Tracy, Tracey, period, Hecht, Hecht, at Fabled Films Press. And we can send that and put that up, probably Lori and I, after this, so that you can access
Yeah,
it.
also, I think, Afrina, if you could put that into the chat, that would be nice. We do have another question in the chat from Shira, which is related. Is there a website that gives more info on the type of submissions you're looking for?
We have not published the submission request for two reasons. One is that we find it's almost impossible for us to go through all of those submissions. We get thousands and thousands anytime we do a call, and just we don't have the resources to go through and know. So what we tend to do is find writer partners through events like this. There's an organization in Colorado called the Word for Diversity, which promotes a lot of emergent voice writers. And we worked with them, and that's how we found the writer for Frankenstein. Hopefully we'll find some interested people today who might want to apply. And Maria will send you all of the materials for it.
Great.
I think Celie has her hand up.
Thanks, but yeah, it's a bit related to Anne's question posted to chat. Yeah, I wasn't sure yet if you have some kind of maybe it's just a dream list of existing classic titles that you would be interested to see authors take on, or are you not working within that container right now and having people bring our own suggestions of works? And so that's maybe kind of picking up what Anne was asking. And then I also am wanting to clarify along with that. I wasn't entirely sure from what you presented earlier. You spoke about putting out a collection, but in my first assumption would be that's short stories, but I understand that in the bigger picture, the press is also looking for novels. So could you clarify if you're what is the kind of work in this collection that you're seeking?
Yes, both great questions. It's so funny because I find that even when we talk with our partners in the business, whether it's like librarians or teachers, everyone uses the word collection in a different way. So first, why don't I answer the question you asked about which works we're focused on, because it's a good one, because we had a list when we started of works we thought we would do. And what we realized is that it's much more exciting for the writer to connect to a work that they find interesting and in some way really reflective of the voice that they want to share. So originally we thought we wouldn't do any Shakespeare, but I have a neurodivergent writer who really wants to do Hamlet. And in her mind, she thinks Hamlet's just an incredibly rich, wonderful, neurodivergent character. And so we're going to go ahead and I think do Hamlet. We work with a lot of writers, because what we found is, because we work with non-professional writers in addition to professional writers, not every writer makes it all the way through a manuscript. It's one thing to really like writing and to want to be a writer. It's another to go through the grueling process of a 200-page manuscript. It takes a long time. There's a lot of editorial work that goes into it, a lot of revision. And so, that's fine for us, because we really like working with the writing community. But what we're doing right now is we're asking writers to tell us what book they would want to reimagine. And if we find that it's too obscure and it's really not reflected on any of the syllabuses in syllabi in North America, then we might have a conversation with a writer. If someone wanted to do something that is really obscure, we might consider the benefits and drawbacks of having that as part of the collection. But the idea is that we would really want to know from you what you would want to write too. And then to your question about collection, we're using the word collection almost like an imprint, so that they are novels, they're middle grade length novels, but by doing them within a single umbrella, it's much easier to get you the proper attention you need. If I just launch Pippa Park Raises Her Game, and then whatever working title we end up with, Frankenstein, and there's no connection to them, I start from scratch every time. And it's really almost impossible for me as a publisher to get you the support you deserve as a writer. So if I say, this Frankenstein Reimagining is the second work in our collection of reimagined classics behind Pippa, then I have a much easier time finding a foray for you as a writer and for your novel.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I just want to say I do see the hands that are up, and I'm going to do my best to go in order. They do come up in order here if you use the reaction button to raise your hand. The next person actually was in the chat was Shira again, but I think the question has been pretty much answered, which is what other works besides Frankenstein are being reworked. So I think we can go ahead now to Serge. And I just want to say, Serge, you can unmute yourself, that Melanie is next.
While Serge is unmuting, I'll let you guys know we also have a Bronte novel in development right now too.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question was, you want to reimagine classics. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I mean, very loosely reimagine.
Okay, so if a writer has, let's say, original work of his own, it wouldn't be interesting, or?
Well, we always, I really like your colleagues, the birds too. But we do take submissions, but again, along those lines of being able to properly support our writers, a standalone book, we always take submissions, and writers are constantly submitting for manuscripts to us. But the idea is that, we really are invested in this sort of backlist idea of making sure that we can properly support a writer and a book for a longer period of time than just the 3 to 4 weeks around the pub date. So most of the time we get manuscripts, we encourage writers to find another publisher to publish it, because I think that works better with their model, to find, to launch other books.
This is like a project you have for revisiting classics?
Yeah, so essentially what we do at Fabled is we pick a category for almost 2 years, 2 to 3 years. That's what we did with the Nocturnals, and that's what we're doing with the classics. And the idea is that we put as much material behind that idea, and support it with as much marketing as we can to give it, a proper long-term ability to survive in the marketplace. And then we try to translate some of those stories into other mediums as well. That's essentially what kind of publisher we are. We're just, it's what we do, and every publisher has a different, business strategy.
When we look at a classic, let's say you were talking about Frankenstein, that means that the writer has to reimagine or find something new, or a sequel, or
they
something
basically,
like that?
In the case of Frankenstein and in the case of Great Expectations, they created a cast that was very similar in thematic role of the original work. So they pick characters who represent other characters from the original text. And then they pick themes in the book that they think are most relevant to the story they can tell. And then they put it in a contemporary setting with essentially middle grade protagonists, so that readers are reading about people their same age. The protagonists are always, let's call it, in the cases of the classics work, they're, let's call it, 6th grade, 6th to 7th grade. And then they essentially use the story arcs of the original work to create their story arcs in a contemporary setting.
So basically, it would be like I'm taking a classic and I'm making a script for a movie or for a film or for something like that.
The outline development is really helpful, I think, for writers, because in the case of Great Expectations, the book we reimagined with a Korean American writer, we took the main characters and we took the main themes and we thought of a fresh way to tell the story in a contemporary setting. And we built the outline essentially with the outline of the original Great Expectations side by side, deciding when to diverge from it and when to employ things that were, more literal.
Okay, so what happens? Somebody takes let's say, the Tale of Frankenstein, puts it in the contemporary form with new players, like you were saying. The demographics are different. The timeline is different, like today's generation, XYZ. So he would take this tale and make a new tale out of it.
Exactly. In the case of Frankenstein, I'll give you a little spoiler. It's two twins who get relocated to live with their father on the border of Texas and Mexico. And they have a stepsister, and a friend of theirs who has died in their old town reappears. And they have conjured him, they think, by doing a form of magic that they learned from their grandmother in Mexico. And then it's about manipulating this character and what becomes of this new character who has reappeared from the past, they think.
So it's nouveau genre, what kids like today.
We hope.
That's what I see.
Serge, we do have several other people waiting to ask questions.
I'll thank you very much.
Okay.
Of course.
Next is Melanie. And after Melanie, I have some more questions from Shira.
Hi, so my question is, how much time would we have to write this thing? Let's say we actually get the contract, because I'm also doing my doctorate. So I'm like, do I have time for this? I really, really want to do it, but I need to know, like, logistically, do I have time?
It's a great question. And it's one of those that we don't have a set answer, because one of the things about working with many writers is not every single one of these books will get published. Not every single one of these books will get published. And so, there we go. Okay. Not every single one of these books will get published, and we can't publish books month after month. That's not our style. So in the case of the Frankenstein writer, who's getting a lot of airtime today, but it's an amazing book, so good for her. But she had to take a 6-month hiatus for personal reasons. So we are flexible around schedules, but we like to have accountability, meaning we don't want to go into it thinking like, well, we'll get to this when we get to this, because as writers, I don't know if any of you can relate, but procrastination is not our friend. So we like to have a schedule, but we can work with long-term schedules too, because I personally, I'm able, my life allows me to write first thing in the morning. But many people have to work on holiday or on weekends, and then it takes a different scheduling. So you should feel comfortable being able to submit and knowing we have some flexibility around working with what you need.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'm going to insert a quick question before Shira's questions, because there's something lingering in my mind that might affect some of the people who are here, which is that although I can't tell from looking at anyone whether they're neurodivergent or even whether they identify as BIPOC or LGBTQ, whatever, those are the authors you're looking for, people in those categories. Is that correct? If someone does not tick off any of those boxes, you would not hire them for this project?
It's a very good question, and one that, I think every single writer has a unique perspective on how they want to tell a story, and it's valuable and it's important. For us, we want to find a way to tell a story that expands what a traditional protagonist might look like from 60 years ago. But I think there's lots of ways to do that. And if you writers are considering doing this, be worth thinking about something that's from your experience that you think is not necessarily, sort of what I would call from I hate to say heteronormative. Someone told me the other day, or someone told my daughter the other day, who is working and with a boyfriend, that she was normaling, that she was pursuing a life of normaling. And it was the first time I had heard that saying, but the idea is that there's really a vast definition of what normaling to me is. And so I would encourage writers to express to me what their unique voice is around this project. And then we can figure out if it works for this project or if it should be saved for another one.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Okay, so back to Shira. She had a couple of questions. Some I'm going to combine. One of them is, what is the pay model basically for this?
It's different if you're published versus if you're not published, because working with a published writer who has demonstrated that they can finish a 200-page manuscript and go to publishing, we feel a little more confident. So what we do is we have a pay scale where we pay in increments. Right now, what we're doing is we're paying people $7,000 for their delivered manuscript. And if it's a published author, we give a bonus at the end. But essentially, we pay you for every stage, because we do find that not every writer makes it all the way to a finished manuscript. So we pay you a signing bonus when we agree to work together of $500. And then we pay for the outline. I think that I have to pull up the contract, but I think that's another $1,000, and it takes about 2 months for us to feel like we get in comfortable shape with an outline. Then we pay you for the delivery of the first draft manuscript. Then we pay you for the delivery of the revised and final manuscript. And then if you're a published author, we do a bonus for publishing the work.
Thank you.
But from our end, just so you know, from our end, there's an incredible financial investment for us to work with new writers and even not known writers, and an incredible financial investment for us once you're in the marketplace. So for us to have this make sense, we pay you for your material, but then we own the material. And we also work really, really hard to figure in some way in the contract that you are available to support your book. Because one of the things we found writers do is, if a writer is not willing to support their title once it's in the marketplace, with touring, with outreach to schools, with programming that we can do on social media, it's almost impossible to get the book the attention it needs, because the author for this audience really is the catch for readers. So we do require, as part of that authors are connected to the book through publishing and marketing of the book, which can be really intense for a year. Obviously, we know everybody here has another job, or not everybody, but everyone we've worked with so far has another job. So we're really respectful of that. But it's really hard to give the book what it needs without the support of the author. So we require that after public date too.
Okay, and just, you mentioned, I do see other questions, I will get to them. You mentioned that you own the material. Do the rights revert to the author if the book is out of print at some point?
We haven't dealt with that, but we could discuss that. Yes. In fact, the reason we do that is because, I'll give you an example for the Nocturnals. We were able to do a really unique, wonderful partnership with, I don't know if you know the brand of hotels, it's called the Wyndham Hotels. You ever heard of a brand of hotels, the Wyndham Hotels? So the Wyndham Grand Hotels are a big hotel chain, and they did a program with the Nocturnals where they gave all of during like their big family weekends and weeks, they gave all of their families who checked in a nocturnal stay. So you checked into your room and you had a nocturnals book, and they brought you nocturnal snacks at night when you went to bed, and they had read aloud programs. And there were all these things about reading. And so they gave your family the opportunity to lock your cell phones up in a little box while you read. It was a really cute program to promote read aloud within families on vacation. And we were the book they selected to do that because we owned all the rights. They didn't have to go negotiate with all the different entities who owned, who were getting something from the book. And it just gives us an ability to support titles in a way that's really unique. So we do own all the rights out. And if something weren't in print, that's a really good question. It's not our model to ever let something go out of print. So it would be bad for Fabled and bad for you, but I would assume, yes, it could revert.
Okay. That's a good answer. I do have one little, I think, short answer kind of question left from Shira. When you mentioned classics, what is the latest year of published works that would be considered a classic?
We're really open to that too, because again, we've started looking at some what I would call Eastern title classics, and those are really fascinating, almost fable-like stories. So I wouldn't give you a date on that. I would tell you that if you had a book you really loved, it's more important that it would be a book that might be in the lexicon of curriculum in high school than it would be a certain date. And at the same time, if you found something that was really rich and interesting, we started looking at First Nations fables and stories. We started looking at things from the Eastern canon. So we're really open to it.
Great. So our next two questions are going to be first from Melanie and then from Pascal.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity, I was wondering if it would be possible to apply as a co-author.
Oh, interesting. Well, listen, so I actually wrote the Nocturnals, the fourth book, with a writer because I was working on the classics already. And I co-wrote it with a writer named Sarah Feber, and she's on the book as well, The Hidden Kingdom, which is the fourth title in the series. And it worked really, really well. And we had a great time. And one of the things I love about writing is the solitude of it. But one of the things I hate about writing is the solitude of it. So having a writing partner was terrific. I would tell you, we don't have the resources in-house to give you a partner. But if you had an idea to come with a partner, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, because I already have a published book and I co-wrote it with someone else who is here today. So,
oh, excellent.
So, yeah, so just wondering if we could like apply together if we both happen to like the same book and like.
Oh, that's a great idea. And also, like, all the more that you've proven that you're a great team, even better. I love that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Pascal?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hi. I was just wondering, you have this payment model that sounds like a work for hire?
It is a work for hire.
Okay. Let's say the book does really, really well, either because the author put much effort into promoting it, as you said. I think you said they would have to promote it for maybe a year.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say it takes off. Would there be like maybe a little thing saying in the contract, well, after a certain number of copies, maybe it could revert to royalties or something like that?
We would never revert to royalties because it would take away our ability to go and do things that I mentioned, like with Wyndham and even with Red Knot for the Nocturnals. But it's interesting. We haven't had that question yet. And we haven't been in that position to have to evaluate that. But we've mostly felt that the trade-off for us in working with writers and really investing in and supporting their career, as a result, we get the work and we get to try to, make something of it. And, I think you all know from publishing, it's not guaranteed. So it's a work for hire opportunity, and probably you should just consider it like that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, this next question is, some of the things in the chat are not questions. So if I accidentally skip over something that is a question, let me know. This is from Kaylee. Do the reimagining stories have to be in a contemporary setting, or could it be in a fantastical setting?
That's something we're just starting to experiment with too. I never like to say no, because especially at early stages of, excuse me, especially at early stages of creative development, I just think it's a mistake to say no to something. We do like a contemporary setting because it helps us put these together as a collection. Sorry. But I think that if you had a really interesting take on something that was in a more fantastical setting, I'd be really, really excited to hear it.
Okay. Susan, your question looks to me as if it's been handled. Is that, no, you go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yes, because now I have another one. Yes. When you talk about, I'm sorry, I missed the first couple of minutes of the whole presentation, so I didn't hear much about the nocturnals, mea culpa. I'll go back to the recording. But when you talk about high school curricula, it would seem to me that Canadian high schools, I mean, there is a emphasis now, even when I was in high school, you know, on Canadian works, but of course we did, you know, some of the American or beyond, Shakespeare, and but I'm just wondering, there must be a marked difference between American curriculum and Canadian curriculum, no?
I would imagine there is. And, you know, I personally live in Montreal, but the whole business and all of our partners, the majority of our partners are in the US.
Right.
So for me, you know, we will market this book in the US primarily. That doesn't mean that in the next like 5 years, we won't build out our network in Canada. It just means that we don't have it now. So, I don't know what, you know, we did a pretty comprehensive study of curricula from different states. You know, we looked at big states like Texas and California and New York. We looked at smaller states. We tried to get a sense of like, what are they reading in high school? And it's like you'd imagine, it's like all over the map, right? So, but at the same time, we also know that there are some acknowledged, there's a body of work that's acknowledged from that era that people are aware of. And I'd be interested to see what the Canadian curricula reflects based on the research we did. And it's something that, you know, moving to Montreal, and, you know, Quebec is its own version of Canada too. So, so we need to learn more about that and develop those partnerships better. But in terms of like what we can offer a writer right now, our network is primarily US based. We have sales in France, we have sales in China. We've translated our books. We have sales in Spain with translated works. But again, those networks aren't as, they're not as robust. So, you know, we just think about where can we do the best for this book? And right now it's more US centric.
Okay, so an American title would be more likely to catch that interest you, I would think, right?
Well, no, because these are really, most of the books we're talking about are from England. So we're not really using American titles. We're not doing, you know, we're not doing Steinbeck or any of the contemporary writers in the US. So we haven't gotten to there. It wouldn't mean we couldn't, but right now we've been focused primarily on classic works.
Classic, but why do you mention Victorian? Because Hamlet is not Victorian.
I know. And, you know, to some degree it's terrible because, you know, when you ask me these questions, like, are you doing any fantasy? And I say, I don't want to say no, because to some degree, like being a creative director, you want to give the best material to readers. So if I'm really stringent and structured and cut something off that would in fact work, why would I do that? So we started with the Victorian canon. We are expanding it. And we would be eager to think about ways to expand it, even just in terms of our definition of what an emergent voice is, has really started to expand. So it's a terrible non-answer that I'm flexible, but I think we are really flexible because the idea is we want readers to connect to material they'll see again in a way that will make them excited for it rather than dread it. And so, you know, we can define that really broadly, or we can define it really narrowly, and we're choosing to pursue a broader, more expanded view of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course.
Next question is from Dorothy. Is your first run always in hardcover? And what is the normal size of the first run? Have you ever gone into second or third printings?
Okay, so this is a question that I could like keep you on for another hour, because right now publishing books and literally printing books is really complicated. We have done multiple runs on our books. We don't tend to be incredibly aggressive in our first run. I personally am really excited about not necessarily following the format of a hardback release followed by a year later a paperback release. I think the marketplace has a lot more flexibility than traditional publishers have given it credit for. In particular, I think paper over board looks great as just the only type of book that's produced and works well in libraries. But we have, for the first question, released books on a hardback with a year later following a paperback. And we do that mostly because our librarian partners needs hardback. So we have to do it in hardback for our library partners. And the paperback sales do more. In terms of the runs, that's really complicated because I don't know if any of you are like waiting on something to be delivered that you ordered like 6 months ago. My stove broke a year ago, but I don't want to like, I have to get a stove that fits that hole. And it took me 9 months to get a stove that worked in that space because supply chain is such a mess right now. And I will tell you, as a book publisher, it's really complicated. We publish our books obviously in the US, but we print them in China and in Canada and sometimes in the US. It's just a cost issue. And, we tend to do our largest runs out of China with a longer lead time. And if we need to supplement, we do shorter runs out of the US and Canada, but it's much more expensive and there's not a lot of profit on a book anyway. So we just do it if we have to. But for the most part, yes, we do a hardback launch, a year later, a paperback support, and then we try to do auxiliary material around it. So in the case of Pippa, we launched the first book in February of 2020, so right before the pandemic, which was terrible because she had a 3-month tour already set that got canceled, and unfortunately she didn't get the attention she deserved. But we did a great job with that book. In the pandemic, of the new titles that were released in 2020, less than 2,000 books, over 100,000 were obviously published, less than 2,000 books sold more than 5,000 copies, which is just really discouraging if you're a writer to hear that statistic. But Pippa has over 30,000 in print, which is really, like, it just did great. And that's a testament to our publishing team, who really understands distribution and really understands how to be great in our distribution. And we did a paperback release a year later in April, or a year and a couple months later in April. And then we're doing a Pippa journal, which is sort of like a really fun, sort of almost like journal workbook for middle graders based on the characters and the story that's coming out in this September. So we continue to support this book in really like sort of great ways for our reader. And that's about getting you as the writer the most attention you can get. But when we go back to the original question, Pascal, you asked about reversion and writer for hire. We're doing a whole nother book around her book to get people to read her book that she didn't do, but it's increasing her sales tremendously. So we really do support, like, we do these things that we think are in trade.
Thank you. The next question is from Ashley. Speaking to the marketing process, I was wondering if it would be possible to add discussion questions or help create educational material around the book after it was completed. Would that be expected from the authors who were involved, or is that something that you've done before?
So, really good question. We have a really, really strong educational team that works with us, and we do everything from book club questions to science, as STEM programs that we do in schools. And we always hire teachers and curriculum specialists to do that for us. So we pair somebody with you in your book, and they essentially do the entire guide because they're educators and that's what they do. And we use the material that is in the text and from the original work to make it interesting and engaging for teachers. And they work with teachers really closely too, to know what teachers need in the classroom and what works within curriculum. So it's not something that the author does at all. It's something that the publisher does independently. And it's really important to support the book because libraries and teachers are probably our most important partners next to independent booksellers. And they really need it in terms of making that book a valuable part of their day and their school.
Okay, the next question I have is from Dara. I suppose the text to be reimagined would have to be in the public domain?
It does have to be in the public domain. We have to be able to use public domain works, yes. And also one thing I just want to go back to the question about curriculum and study guides and STEM and social emotional learning things. If you go to our website, Fabled Films Press, you can see the extensive programs we offer. You can link to the Nocturnals and you can link to Pippa Park and see what's already there, just so to give you a sense of, you know, what we offer to our partners.
Because I don't want to silence any voices, this isn't a question, but someone has said, I just want to say it's great to give an unknown author a paid writing opportunity, but it feels so exploitative to take away all of their copyrights. The fair thing to do is what someone suggested, that if it does really well after X amount of copies being sold, that copyright and royalties, the author deserves a cut.
You know what? It's the standard practice. So whoever submitted that is totally correct that is what is standard practice. And frankly, there are a lot of publishers that offer that. But for what we do, which is really different, we don't do a lot of frontlist titles. We invest in books over a long period of time. We can't do it. So we just have a totally different model than other publishers. And if that's important to you, and honestly, it's the norm, so you're not the only person, then there's literally countless publishers out there that you can reach out to.
Thank you. Raquel would like to know what Bronte title you're working on.
Oh, I can't disclose that yet. She hasn't decided.
Oh, okay.
Between two.
Kaylee, I think your question has about what's considered a classic has now been treated. Raquel, again, can you confirm your email with dot between your first and last name or without?
It's with a dot. So that will go, and actually we can put that up in the chat. It's Tracy.Hecht at Fabled Films.
Yeah, it is in the chat somewhere, I think. Oh, is there a mistake in the one that's in the chat? There's a mistake in what's already in the chat. So Afrina, if you could correct that and put it up again, that would be great. Thank you, Raquel.
Okay. I see it, Afrina. It's up.
Okay. Okay, Celie, I would be interested in more comments from Tracy or the press as a whole. Well, we only have Tracy here. So, Ray Shira's questions on the future rights. Maybe the press can write some FAQ or more in-depth notes on the contract frameworks that can be sent to inquiring authors. So that's a sort of a, you know, something to take back with you to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I think right now it's Pascal.
I was just wondering, did you mention the number of words you were looking for? I think you said about 200 pages.
It's about 200. I think it's about, isn't it about 25,000 words? I should know this. I can get back to you on that, Pascal, because okay. All of our writers use different formats. So we tend to just say 200 pages, but it doesn't have to be 200 pages, and I can find out the word span too.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I don't think I have any more questions. Anyone else? Raquel, just unmute yourself. And then Tina, did I see your hand as well? No, okay. Well, I did see your hand, but it was. Go ahead, Raquel.
Thanks, Laurie. I had a question for you, Tracy, about working with the writers in various different formats, because the project seems to work in, you were saying, YouTube and TV and stuff like that. So do you have the idea of a carryover for a writer, say Pippa, the writer of Pippa, may be involved in script writing if that was ever picked up by Nelvana, for example? Is that how, when you're talking about a partner writer, since there are no royalties involved, I'm wondering what is the reason somebody gets involved with you with the hopes of growing as a writer and growing their profile and growing all the things that are going to be useful, including, of course, rewards for surviving and feeding children, right? So I'm just wondering, what is the track of in that sense? Because I think it's for Canada, a $7,000, you know, upfront is pretty generous, considering, you know, what, you know, how much you might sell in Canada, even if you got your $2,000 advance and you sold 2,000 copies over 5 years or whatever. But on the other hand, it is a question of, it's great that Wyndham takes, say, as many copies for the, you know, it's a great to be in on that deal, but only in terms of a very vague sort of, my profile is now increased, rather than a sense of, oh, you sold 30,000 copies and that translates into something different for me. So I'm just wondering where that sense of partnership.
It's you know, again, this is, most of you know the traditional model, right? Which is, you know, royalty based.
Yeah.
And it's what every publisher does. We don't do it because we don't make any money on our books.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to make money long term, because we're really supporting these titles as, even though they're front list, we're supporting them as backlist, which is really complicated and hard to do. And I don't need to take you through it, but like, there's always something new and exciting coming into the marketplace. So getting someone to really care about something that was published 4 years ago is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so our investment in that is significant. Our investment in writers is significant, especially because we don't just give a $7,000 signing contract to a writer. We do it in increments, because we really work with writers to build out. You know, we have many writers, I shouldn't say many, we have 4 or 5 writers who we worked with in development who did not publish a work with us, but who learned a lot and have continued to go on in writing.
Right.
So they had a valuable experience with us. That, you know, it's not a grad school experience, but it really, you know, they work with some of the best editors, some of the best developers, some of the best publishers, and they learn a lot from us. So we do think that there is a trade.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of the first published writer, I don't think she would disclose this. I mean, worry that I disclose this because I think it's in her bio now, but she on her published work has a full ride to Oxford in the MFA program there. Because of her published work. So she's getting an MFA at Oxford this fall in England. And she's writing her own material now, and she's a known author. So she doesn't have to publish with us the next time she does something. So we're really investing in usually first-time writers. We've not worked with a published author yet. So for us, we really, you know, if it's not the right opportunity for you, I really respect that. And I really understand that, but I am really comfortable with why we do what we do and why it makes sense for us.
I wasn't challenging what you do. I think it's a great idea. I'm just trying to figure out, in terms of, you know, for me, as say, you know, I've published a few books.
Right.
What, for me, I'm interested in doing collaborations with people now. I'm tired of the solitary thing. So this was a very interesting idea for me, and I wanted to hear, but I'm also curious, like, beyond the book itself, does it mean that there's a potential for, say, looking at writing for other media besides, you know, the actual book?
In the case of the Nocturnals, I am not a writer on that project.
Okay.
There's you know, I'm a part of the development team, but I am not a writer on that project. I don't know how much you know about Cavco law around producing materials in Canada, but there's a lot of law around it. And so I'm omitted from it. And I'm not part of like any of the federations there, and I can't do it. So in the case of that, you know, we don't get that.
Gotcha.
But the idea is that we'll hopefully drive kids back to the books, which we do still have, right? Yeah. So, and just to be clear, I work for Fabled, so it's not the same, but I'm a contract hire there too. You know, I don't get royalties for my books either.
Yeah.
It's a really different model, and I don't think it necessarily works for a published author who has a great following and can publish a book and get great support around it.
It's one thing to be a big published author. It's another thing to have a great following. Those are
I know, it's really hard.
Yeah. So most of us are looking for ways to continue writing and working with people who are interested in writing for children. And that's, you know,
it's
that's
really, it's hard. It's really hard. And I totally respect and understand it. You know, I hope that Erin, our first writer in this, when she does another book, that she gets a great amount of attention because, you know, people know her and she's really well liked, and our library partners love her book, and our, you know, independent booksellers know her. But in terms of Pippa, I would tell you, we haven't literally made a penny on that book, despite it doing like incredibly well. So it's not, you know, we all are in publishing. We know this is not a job you go to for the money, right? And some people hit it out of the park, and that's amazing. But the idea is that we really do these as writer for hire opportunities.
Yeah, and I just to throw in my own point of view for people who are talking about royalties this, royalties that, just to say that, you know, I really appreciate that people are looking for other ways to produce works in today's world, because nobody could argue that the publishing system as it stands with royalties, although it is fair, is in any way especially successful for the people who are working in it. Like, everybody's working hard, nobody's making money. And a lot of books, as Tracy has said, are kind of just disappearing anyways. So, like, you know, don't say, oh, it has to be like this, or it has no meaning for my career as a writer. That's all. I just throw that out there for myself and for anybody else who's kind of getting upset about the idea of work for hire.
You know, the work for hire thing also, just to be totally frank, you know, this is what we started our model with at the company. And the idea was that we have more flexibility and ways to promote this, and the investment we put into it can be greater justified because of it. But I would tell you that, like, as a company, as a press, you know, we have not, this is, you know, perhaps too much information, but it hasn't returned to us yet either. So, you know, it's still unproven that it will work in the way that we're hoping it will work. You know, so at the same time, I know the big presses, and I know that they really struggle too with profitability. So it's you know, books are tricky. It's a tricky thing. And I think we do it because we love it, and we do it because we really care about the readers. But it is, you know, this is the way we've pursued it. And if it's not a great fit for a writer, we really respect that. And if it is a great fit, like in the case of, you know, the writers we're working with on the project now, then we're really happy about that too.
Okay, I do see one more question from Serge. Serge, I assume you're trying to unmute yourself. I know it's difficult with an iPad sometimes to get to the controls. Oh.
Oh, well. I do want to say, though, that, you know, as a writer, I really do love working with other writers, and our editors really do love working with other editors. So, you know, if this isn't a project that is interesting to you, you know, I really respect and understand it. But if it is, I do think that it is, you know, as a writer, it's a great team. And we learn and grow a lot as writers on all of our projects, which has been, I think, really valuable for everyone, from the editor all the way down to the new writers, and myself included. And we work really well with our publishing team too, which is really smart. A lot of times there's a very hard line between the creative and the distribution, the publishing business side. But we have a really, really great relationship with all of our publishers and our publishing team, marketing team, which is really fun, I think, for writers to have that acknowledgement and integration with the support and promotion of their book.
Thank you, Tracy. Serge has solved this problem.
Yes, it's off the wall a little, because I also published poetry. They're like little tales, and is Nocturnals interested in something like that?
I mean, it doesn't feel obvious to me, though. My daughter's a poet, so I always want to find ways to get poetry published. But it doesn't, I'm not sure we'd be a great fit for collection of poems. Though I always like to read things if people send them. So
if I would send, I have like a published book from years ago. It's called Poems for All Seasons, and it had 600 and some odd poems, but they're like little tales. And I published it, and it just went out of publication because it was what they call a printer publisher. You know, it was self-published.
Yeah, of course.
And it's an American theme. So maybe I could send it to you. You could go over it, and if there's anything in there, you know.
I would love to read it. I would love to read it. I'm not sure we'd be the right fit, but I would love to read it.
Okay.
Great. And
that was my question.
Thanks, Serge. And now Melanie.
Hi, sorry for all the questions. So because I've worked with a co-author before, I am interested in like doing a pitch as a co-author with this author, but I also want to grow on my own. So I was wondering if it would be possible to send 2 pitches, one with my co-author and then one by myself for a different project. Would that be acceptable? Or is there a limit to like?
No, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Okay, great, fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Because honestly, like as a writer, you never know what's going to be the thing that's the most fun to do. So it's nice to explore other things. I would love to see both.
Great, awesome, thanks.
Thanks.
We have another question from Susan. And then Tracy, you let me know if you're feeling like it's time to draw this to a close, because the questions, they keep popping up as I think we're finished.
No, I'm fine. I did just notice that a storm came in, so all of a sudden I'm very shrouded in like a dark light. I don't have any more lights, so I'm sorry about that.
Okay, well, let's just hope your power doesn't go out. Ray, the marketing, it would be important for me to know more about the expectations. For example, is it more like travel to 10 cities or 30 cities or?
Oh, that's a good question. And we should be so lucky as to do 30 cities. You know, I will say that one thing we found this year, Lori mentioned I did a panel on virtual school visits. That was pre-pandemic. And now we're doing so much online. You know, I'm doing whole school visits where some of the kids are in the school in the auditorium, maybe 200 or 300 kids, and then maybe 200 or 300 kids are doing hybrid in their home. So we're doing like really dynamic school visits that are really easy because, you know, for me, it's an expensive and almost impossible thing for me to go and visit schools based on the budgets we have. But we can do a lot virtually. In terms of your commitment, you know, it's one of those things where we really do respect that people have lives, people have jobs, people have families, but we want your book to do well. So the marketing team works with you that what works with you. And so, you know, I'm not prolific on social media. It's not a format or a medium that I really enjoy or I'm particularly good at. So I do different things, but other writers do a lot on social media on their own time. And that's super successful in promoting books as well. So we really do work with a writer on what works best for them and for their book, with the understanding that everybody has jobs and they have really limited budgets. So I think Erin's tour was a 3-week tour in, I want to say in 6 cities. But that was the biggest we'd ever done in terms of a physical tour. You know, if we can get you speaking events, especially at big industry events, that's really valuable. If you can go to the American Booksellers Association, if you can go to, you know, Midwinter and meet with librarians, if you can do some of these big trade shows, that's really valuable. But again, that's just based on your schedule and we ask you a year in advance. So, you know, if you need to take 2 days off to go and it's valuable to you, we try to pitch you for those places. And if you get picked, you know, it's a decision we make together. So I don't think you should be afraid of the marketing. You should just know that, you know, it's a big part of making sure your book is successful.
Okay, I do not see any other questions pending. Sal 221, can you? We're not hearing you, and you don't appear to be muted either. Maybe you'd be best to put it into the chat.
You can also follow up with an email question if somebody is having any technical issues or wants to ask questions in terms of the application process. Okay. I'll just say, well, I don't even know if this is your name, Sal, or if that's really just the room you're in, I suspect. While Sal 221 is working on typing a message or getting us the question, oh, Renata, I got a note from Riley, thank you. We can't hear you, Renata. We don't hear anything. I will ask Afrina to send out the link, if possible, to everyone who's, or Riley, one of you, to send out the link, but also the chat. There's been a request for the chat to be sent out. So I guess some people logged off and logged back in and lost some of the chat that way. Okay, so now, Renata, I see that you are muted. You're still muted. I think you hit it twice. It came and went. Can you go to the chat? We can't hear you. If you type your question in the chat, then Tracy can answer it. Otherwise, there's no other way. We can't hear you. I'm sorry. There's something wrong with the sound. Why don't you send an email? You saw Tracy's email address? Why don't you send her an email directly afterwards? I'm going to move on. There's one other question from Shira, and then I think maybe it's time to wind up. Does the company cover the travel costs, accommodations, meals, etc., for the marketing? Yes, of course. We work with you on where we actually manage all that for you too. We'll book your travel. I shouldn't say we. It's the team in the marketing office, and you have a T&E. So that you don't have to pay for your own food on the, when you're touring and all that kind of thing too. It's really, I will say, it's a real gift to get to meet your readers face to face. So, it's one of those things that if you are interested, and it does end up being a published work with Fable, going out and going to schools and libraries and speaking to your readers is like, in terms of like feedback for me, it's like one of the most valuable things I do as a writer, because that's your audience, that's who you do it for, and you learn so much from them. So it's I really encourage you to want to do it, in addition to hopefully deciding to do it with us. Okay, I think we've covered everything then. I want to thank you, Tracy. This was hugely informative. After our original discussion, I didn't have the whole picture. I am much better in a position to understand it now and to answer questions if anyone comes to me, or to just suggest that people who weren't here today write to you if they have something that might be up your alley. I think everyone can unmute now if they like, and just sort of join me in appreciating Tracy and the fact that she gave us so much of her time today. I want to say thank you too, because, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to speak with writers. I'm so glad to expand our partnerships with writers into Canada. And I feel like the same things you guys go through, the same things I go through. So if you ever want to just reach out and we can have a dialogue as peers, I would really like that too. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great day.
You too.